Hi, welcome to the channel. Today's video is titled The Causes of the Wars of the Roses Explained. Interesting, we're going to check this video. So what actually led to me checking this video, this is was I think as a result of the Battle of the Yorks and the Lancasters, and I asked a question. I wanted to know about the war, the royal family, between the two royal families. And somebody also commented or asked me or recommended to check the War of the Roses, which we already did. So this is another video sharing the causes of the War of the Roses, which looks like quite an interesting one, obviously. So we're going to check this together. And I would love your thoughts and your contribution in the comments below. Let's dive right in. Okay.
It was a strange setting for a battle. On the 22nd of May 1455, the narrow lanes of St Albans echoed to the sound of war. Just over 20 miles north of London, this prosperous town found itself the setting for a vicious series of skirmishes that lasted little over an hour. But its scale belied its importance. The king himself was bloody. Mighty nobles lay slaughtered in the gutter. The victors seized the reins of power. It was also the start of something much bigger. A skirmish that would sire battles of unimaginable scale. It was the start of the Wars of the Roses.
First Battle of St. Albans.
The roots of the conflict stretched far back before the clash in St Albans. Men fought and died there for a cause that was nearly a century old. A cause born out of the ambitious rivalry of royal cousins. On the 21st of June 1377, Edward III died. In his 50-year reign, he transformed medieval England into one of the most formidable military powers of Europe, with major victories in the early part of the 100 Years' War against
100 Years' War? As in 100. 100. No way. No way. You see, with history, I'm going to say it again, over and over again, and tirelessly. We are the luckiest generation to ever live. Ever.
formidable military powers of Europe, with major victories in the early part of the 100 Years' War against France, leading to land, castles, and the favourable Treaty of Bretigny. Edward's heir had been as brilliant as his father, but the year before, Edward, the Prince of Wales, the Black Prince, had died unexpectedly, before his father. The next heir was the prince's 10-year-old son, Richard. England, once so secure in the thrall of Plantagenet warlords, now had a boy on the throne, and in the 14th century, this meant the crown was terribly vulnerable. Dominated by powerful uncles, Richard struggled to assert himself against a backdrop of renewed war with France, rebellion at home, and the dislocation of the terrible Black Death. By 1387, a group of nobles, known as the Lords Appellant, purged the royal court in what was to become known as the Merciless Parliament, wresting control from the teenage king. Richard fought back. Another truce with France strengthened his hand. By 1389, he seemed to have been back in control, but he never felt secure. And in July 1397, he decided to take revenge on the Lords Appellant through execution, exile, and the harsh imprisonment of the ringleaders. He drove his cousin Henry Bolingbroke, who was the son of his powerful, wealthy uncle John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, into exile.
Family. Drove his uncle, the son of his uncle, his cousin, into exile. Family. Wow. Wow.
When Gaunt died, Richard disinherited Bolingbroke. It was a terrible mistake. Enraged and now with nothing to lose, Bolingbroke invaded England. Powerful northern lords rallied to him, and fuel was added to the flames of his ambition. By late summer of 1399, it was not just his father's lands and titles he sought, but those of his royal cousin. Richard was captured and imprisoned, conveniently dying just a few months later. Henry crowned himself Henry IV, King of England, France, and Lord of Ireland.
He crowned himself. Let's even talk about Richard, right? Because what do you think would happen to a child who ascended the throne as a child and saw so many level of brutality? Do you expect him to be a saint to it? Is of course he's not gonna be a saint to it. But again, lots of brutal things happened in history, and I don't think we in this generation want those things to be repeated. We don't want it. But of course, there are people who may sit somewhere and be like, okay, they want a part of history to be repeated, which honestly doesn't even make sense. The essence of learning history is to free our mind and to understand exactly what happened to make sure that it's not repeated or it doesn't happen again. It makes total sense, right?
Henry IV sat upon his throne, his son at his side, but his dynasty would never escape the taint of his usurpation. If the House of Lancaster could steal the crown, then the other branches of the Plantagenet family, such as the Duke of York, could do the same, and competing birthrights could only be settled on the battlefield.
It was a family fight.
Henry and his House of Lancaster survived noble rebellion and Welsh revolt, and looked secure. Relentless campaigning allowed him to cling to power until his death in March 1413. His son, crowned Henry V, already an experienced soldier, looked unshakable on the throne. So much so he launched into another round of fighting in France to finally secure the French crown his forebears had claimed, but never worn. A series of stunning military victories, like the Battle of Agincourt in October 1415, brought Henry's dream achingly close. At the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, he won the right to succeed the French King Charles VI. Henry and his Lancastrian heirs would sit upon the throne of France. It was not to be. On the 31st of August 1422, Henry V died of dysentery, aged just 35. Just 6 weeks later, King Charles VI of France also died.
So throne is
Henry's
empty.
grand vision of him ruling over a union of England and France would not quite be realised. Instead, his infant son, aged just 9 months old,
9 months?
inherited his father's claim, but little else. England, once again, had a child on the throne. Enemies, foreign and domestic,
Yeah.
circled. Charles VI's disinherited son, the Dauphin Charles, repudiated his father's treaty now that the warlike Henry V was safely entombed in Westminster Abbey.
Because tell me, 9 months old. Do you think the elders or older people would want an infant to rule them? Even if there were people who wanted to see that, okay, it's passed down to the family. Remember, ego, pride, and all that stuff will not let some people be like, first thing that will come to their mind is, um, let's say somebody who is in his 40s, right, or 50s will say, how and why would they let an infant or a child rule them or tell them what to do? Does that make sense?
His forces, spurred by the charismatic Joan of Arc, defeated the English at Orleans and Patay in 1429. He cared nothing for the claim of a baby in England and crowned himself Charles VII, King of France. On the 12th of November 1437, Henry VI
Who did? Wait.
quite be realised. Instead, his infant son, aged just 9 months old, inherited his father's claim, but little else. England, once again, had a child on the throne. Enemies, foreign and domestic, circled. Charles VI's disinherited son, the Dauphin Charles, repudiated his father's treaty now that the warlike Henry V was safely entombed in Westminster Abbey. His forces, spurred by the charismatic Joan of Arc, defeated the English at Orleans and Patay in 1429. He cared nothing for the claim of a baby in England and crowned himself Charles VII, King of France. On the 12th of November 1437, Henry VI came of age, King of England and nominally of France.
Okay.
But like Richard II before him, he'd inherited powerful uncles, scheming nobles, and the never-ending Ulcer-French War. By the mid-1440s, the young Henry was in desperate search of a truce with France, and also a wife. A French princess, Margaret of Anjou, came with a fine pedigree but no money or land. The condition was the Treaty of Tours. Henry would get a wife and breathing space, but he would have to cede Maine and Anjou to the French. His negotiators tried to keep this secret. They foresaw the rage in England that land taken with English blood on the battlefield was lost at the negotiating table for a French princess for the king. Public scorn was mirrored at court, where Henry's magnates and royal relatives jockeyed to dominate the weak king. Men like William de la Pole, the Duke of Suffolk, and Henry VI's royal cousins, Edmund, the Duke of Somerset, and Richard, the Duke of York. Suffolk and Somerset were dominant figures in government. Richard, a powerful magnate, had held the position of King's Lieutenant in France, but he had a potentially stronger claim to the English throne than even Henry. Richard and the House of York was descended through his mother from Lionel, Duke of Clarence, who was Edward III's second son. The Lancastrian line came through John of Gaunt, who was Edward's third son. Richard of York also had a good claim through his father, who was descended from Edward III's fourth son. At this stage, York was probably not dreaming of stealing Henry's crown, but Henry's weak and vacillating rule meant the court became a cesspit of intrigue and jockeying for influence. Tension grew. In September 1447, York was dismissed from his position in France to be replaced by Somerset, and he was sent to Ireland, long the graveyard of ambitious men.
Hope they will not kill him there.
Embittered York made an immediate claim for his salary and expenses, which was bad news for the cash-strapped treasury. The young Queen Margaret created further problems, siding so strongly with Suffolk and Somerset that rumours began that she was romantically attached to them. In August
Because why? Why are you not supporting your husband? Abi, what is going on?
romantically attached to them. In August 1449, a frail truce with France broke down. King Charles invaded Normandy on 3 fronts. Against a woefully funded garrison and an inexperienced leader in Somerset, French forces inexorably drove the English out of northern France. It culminated in the devastating defeat at the Battle of Thornhill, where 4,000 English soldiers were killed.
4,000.
For his role in the catastrophe, Suffolk was hauled before the House of Commons and put on trial for treason. But before they reached judgment, Henry intervened. He dropped the charge of treason and banished him for secondary misdemeanours. It was not a popular decision and only served to undermine Henry's power base. It was also in vain. Suffolk was murdered on his ship as it sailed the Channel, possibly on York's orders. In spring 1450, the people of Kent broke into open rebellion. Led by Jack Cade, this popular uprising reflected the schism at court. Cade used an alias, John Mortimer. Mortimer had been York's uncle and was one of the sources of his royal claim. 3,000 armed men marched to Blackheath to air their grievances. Unlike Richard II, who dealt with the earlier peasants' revolt through negotiation, Henry woefully mismanaged this situation, alienating the protesters by resorting to violence. Cade inflicted an embarrassing defeat on the Royalists through an ambush at Sevenoaks. Although Cade was later defeated and killed, Henry had showed himself to be a weak and indecisive king. It was one thing to be humiliated in France, quite another in Kent. He then compounded matters further by appointing Somerset Constable of England. The man who had lost France was now responsible for holding England. Sensing weakness, York returned from Ireland in September. It was time to settle his debts. He sent a series of letters to the king expressing his loyalty, but stating that he wished to punish traitors. namely Somerset and John Kemp, the Archbishop of York. In reply, Henry sent instructions to arrest York, but instead, his cousin arrived in London with an armed force of 4,000 men in late September. He forced his way into the king's presence, demanding reform and the banishment of certain individuals. Henry agreed to a compromise. There would be changes, and they would be agreed by a new council, which would include York.
Again, you see what we keep saying about this in regards to history. It's more about power, influence. Who wants to control things? That's what lots of them care about, and partially or part to do with land.
But York still didn't have wide support among English nobles, and the king despised him for his vendetta against Somerset. In 1452, York launched another bid for power. It seems possible that he wanted to establish himself as the heir to the childless Henry and rid himself of Somerset, his cousin and rival claimant. He determined to bring Somerset to trial by using force if necessary. He marched to Dartford. Henry responded by moving a larger force to Blackheath. England teetered on the edge of war. It was avoided, or postponed, by York's loss of nerve. He feared defeat against the king's powerful army and suggested a rapprochement with the king as long as Somerset was arrested. The king seems to have agreed. York rode to Blackheath, but he found the hated Somerset in the king's tent. It was a trick, and York was effectively a prisoner. He was taken to St. Paul's Cathedral, where to swear a solemn oath that he would not raise an armed force against the king. Civil war had been avoided. For now. As so often, it would be affairs in France that threw England back into turmoil. In August 1452, the whole of the Duchy of Aquitaine fell into French hands. In July 1453, the 100 Years' War came to an end, as an English force hoping to reconquer Aquitaine was routed at the Battle of Castillon.
Wow.
Henry VI had lost all of his lands in France, with the exception of the toehold of Calais. Battered by this failure, Henry was also trying to manage disputes between his overmighty lords. In the north, Warwick's Neville family and the Percys were at each other's throats. And in July 1453, escalating foreign and domestic crises had destroyed King Henry's ability to rule, and he suffered total mental collapse. Not even the happy news that his Queen Margaret was pregnant brought him out of his stupor. The birth of his much-needed heir, Prince Edward, came and went in October, and still the illness persisted. Henry was led from room to room, listless, uncommunicative. Who should rule England in the place of the absent king?
This. But again, look at this. It was a child. It was a child. Do you know the mental toll that would have? If let's even bring it to this current era, a toll, mental toll that would take on a child, even an adult. Like, let's even forget the fact that it was 9 months old. Let's even say it was 9 years old or 6 years old. You know the toll, mental toll that would take on him. He hasn't even had time to breathe. Who should rule? Wow, okay.
Margaret attempted to assert her authority,
Would they give
but in
her?
February, York was reluctantly brought back into the fold and nominated as the King's lieutenant. On the 27th of March, after the Archbishop of Canterbury and Chancellor died, York was appointed Protector and Chief Counsellor. York made several appointments to put his own supporters into Parliament and pursued his relentless feud with Somerset, trying and failing to have him tried for treason. Then, on Christmas Day 1454, the king was declared healthy again. His recovery would prove more disastrous than his illness. He quickly set about undoing many of York's appointments. Most importantly, he restored Somerset to the position of Captain of Calais and Constable of England. Henry then committed a further terrible mistake. In April 1455, he called a meeting of the council in Leicester and didn't invite York. Watching his appointments overturned, reforms undone, Somerset restored, and now excluded from this council, proud York decided to act. The king's retinue left London for Leicester on the 21st of May, but were halted by an army commanded by York at St Albans. Internecine violence, so long a spectre that stalked the land, was about to become a terrible reality. England's nobility hacked, thrust, shot and slaughtered each other on the streets of St Albans. The king tasted battle for the first time. Somerset and Percy of Northumberland were slain. Blood feuds started. King Henry himself was injured. Now the Duke of York had the king as a captive. His great rival Somerset was slain. He was made protector of England, the most powerful man in the land. York had won, but it would not last. This was a beginning. Thanks for watching this video on the History Hit YouTube channel. You can subscribe right here to make sure you don't miss.
Thank you. Thank you. This was the beginning of the War of the Roses, which obviously was as a result of family fights, was as a result of greed, evil, power, control. Wow. And I mean, no matter how you try to check history, you will still see that it's still revolving the same power mongering or power mongers, control, evil, the brutality, repeating the same cycle over and over again. But yeah, this was quite interesting and eye opener regardless. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. More so, we're still gonna check lots more videos to understand or to check other angles, because this gave in depth or gave an idea of how how it rose, or how the um families sort of became at war with each other, right? Which makes total sense. And who would have thought? I wouldn't have known about this. But yeah, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and all that stuff. And until next time, see you in the next video.